Hello everyone, I hope that life is treating you well and that everything is fine with you. Today I would like to show you a game that my teammate in my Belgium team, Ilya Zaragatsky, played. It is a coincidence that Ilya is also an editor of the famous site Chess24, and we're sitting next to each other usually when we play a game in Belgium. Last year our team became champion, me, but this year things look tougher as in the last match we couldn't win. We had a very tough opponent, the many-time Belgium champion Einaten, especially in the last years. But Ilya, facing a very strong opponent, Grandmaster Mikhail Saltaev, managed to produce a very good game, and I wanted to share that game with you. That game started with knight f3, and after d5, g3, c6, bishop g2, Ilya castled. He usually plays the ratio opening. He's slowly building his pieces, usually long positional battles, but this time it was somewhat different. You will see what I mean. Okay, so black took that pawn, d takes c4, which is perfectly justified greediness. This is one of the famous lines that black is choosing in this situation, of course. He could have chosen a different plan a little bit earlier. He could have developed this bishop on f5, on g4, and also after knight d7 he could have gone here for the move e5. But okay, it seems like that this was part of the preparation for Mikhail Saltaev, and after c4 he grabbed the pawn. The problem for white is that he cannot easily retake the pawn. In fact, that pawn is already sacrificed. After knight b6, black intends to defend it even further, eventually with bishop e6, sometimes with queen d5, while for white it's quite difficult to attack it at the moment. He played knight a3 and black replied with queen d5, which is one way to defend. Like I told you, there is also the move bishop e6 in this situation. The idea being that a move like knight e5 would be answered queen d4, and now the queen is defending the pawn from here. Then interesting complications start with the move knight takes c6, and after bc6, bishop takes c6. Well, white can take the rook on e8, but he would rather prefer to do it on the next move. And then, well, he once again sacrificed material, not that much. He has a rook and a pawn for two knights, which is normally okay. What is important also is that this king is standing in the middle. But of course black also has one advantage. The position is won from the middle game. And in the middle game, the two light pieces are usually stronger than the rook and the pawn. If white manages to reach endgame, he might be better, especially if he somehow trees that really nasty pawn on c4. Or he can also try to play for the attack against this king into the middle. So there are plenty of things going on here, and you can have a look at the game Aronian with the white piece against Andreikin from Khanty-Mansiysk 2014 if you like to see what happens afterwards. It's a very tense and interesting situation. But Saltaev chose the somewhat more solid queen d5 move. Now that pawn is defended, and also white would very much like to attack the queen, but unfortunately for him he doesn't have good squares for this knight. These two central ones are well covered by Her Majesty, and also if he somehow tries to attack that pawn on c4, the d2 pawn is obstructing him from doing that. Ilya continued with b3, so that's already proper sacrifice as you can see it, and black of course won one tempo with the move bishop f5, and after that he took on b3, a takes b3, and came up with the novelty queen d7. Now about that novelty I'm not very sure. Because even though the queen is seemingly more actively placed on d7 than on d8, like people were playing before, and this is the main line in this situation, probably queen d8 should be the right move for the second player. For example, knight c4 can be answered now on g6. On knight a5, black can, well, he can go backwards with the bishop and defend. White has active moves. Knight e5, he can also sacrifice still on c6, which is really topical idea in this line and pretty much the main idea for white, to sacrifice on c6, then to take this bishop and to take that rook. And all of this has been seen in a game Michalewski against Matignan. Michalewski managed to win it in 2012, but the position itself is rather unclear. and black can definitely play this one. Okay, so why is the move queen d7 weaker? Well, the problem is that now after knight c4, the queen is no longer defending that knight on b6, so knight takes b6 is a deadly threat. And black normally doesn't want to take on c4 in this situation, because in that case, white is going to take and he is going to have the perfect Benoni style compensation on the queen side. Reti opening and Benoni, they have a lot of common in many situations. Here concretely, white is even winning one of the pawns very fast. For example, say g6, d3, bishop g7, he finishes the development, but after rook b1 there is no adequate way for black to defend it. As if he goes rook b8, besides the obvious bishop f4 move, which is not bad at all, but there is also the move knight e5 followed by knight x6 as the rook on b8 is hanging. And the same problem there would be if black goes b6, immediately knight e5, and then the c6 pawn is hanging and everything is hanging. Which means that if white takes that pawn on b7, then most likely he is taking all the remaining pawns, the connecting pawns, the connecting pawn in the middle. Whenever it drops, the remaining is suffering. So that's not a good idea for black for sure. And what else can he do on move number 11? The move that he chose was queen c8. Quite an obvious move. And I would say pretty much the only move. But we can clearly see now that he had lost the tempo. Rather than having the queen back on d8 immediately, he has it now on c8. It's just like he had played queen d8 and on knight c4, the highly dubious move queen to c8. Nobody understands why is he doing that, and Ilya is immediately making use of that. He goes d3. Now on many occasions he wants to play e4 with the tempo, but more importantly he is using the tempo to develop the bishop nicely on e3 and to create pressure against the knight on b6 and the pawn on a7. Now black has once again to be careful. Once again knight takes c4 is working well for white, who is going to take, and this time besides taking that pawn like that, he can also go even rook b1. By the way, if black tries to defend with a move like a6, rook b1 is still winning it in a similar fashion like before. Rook b8, bishop e5 or bishop a7, and the pawn, bishop f4, bishop a7, the pawn would drop on b7. And if instead of this black tries, 97 was tried in the game, if he tries knight to d5, then white can simply capture that pawn. On a7 you already noticed that e4 is always a threat, and with the knight on d5 it's even more unpleasant than before. So therefore knight b to d7. Sad news for black, he has to drop pieces back and to defend obviously in a very uncomfortable way, and already white has plenty of pleasant choice. To start with, he can obviously take that pawn on a7, regain the pawn, and after that have all these advantages for free. But Ilya found an even more interesting way to play. He challenged the bishop on f5 at once, knight to d4, knowing that this bishop has nowhere to go, because if the bishop goes to g4 there is always h3 and there are no more squares left. h5 would be trapped, and bishop e6. Okay, white is happily taking it on e6, destroying the pawn structure of the opponent, takes the two bishops, and then he can gladly take the pawn back on a7 with huge advantage. So Taev found the move bishop to g7, so he just ignored that threat, and well, he didn't have any choice anyway, but now obviously he was expecting something like knight f5, and after g takes f5 probably bishop a7. That would be also a nice advantage for white, but then black can, for example, castle, play e6, bring his pawns on light squares and try somehow to compensate for the fact that he's not having a light squared bishop, and even though he will suffer, and I'm not sure that he can survive this, he can play for a while. Ilya continues to play in a very energetic way. He goes rook a5. Give me that bishop anyway. Black cannot protect it with a pawn. That would be a horrible mistake, as there is a hole on d6 and the knight is gladly taking that hole, and after that the queen as well. So therefore he played knight e5, And here comes the style move of the game. Here comes the style move of the game. Seems like black is doing fine. He's attacking the bishop. He's going to castle on the next move. He had pinned the knight as well. And there's knight f5, but it doesn't seem deadly, even though after knight d6, white is regaining the queen. Black would be very happy to trade the queens overall. And of course, white is losing a piece in this line. We shouldn't forget that white is giving 2 knights away on d6. Anyway, none of this is really happening in the game because white has foreseen already one very nice shot in this position, and this is the move bishop to h6, just deflecting the pinning piece. Very nice, very beautiful move. Idea is obvious. If bishop takes h6, there will be knight f5 with multiple threats. Not only that the rook is hanging, and not only that there is a fork on d6 coming, there is also this bishop on h6 hanging, and when in just one move black cannot defend everything. That's quite obvious. If black takes on d4 instead of that, then after queen d4, white is going to have huge advantage on the dark squares. All his pieces are out, he can regain the pawn, and after that also black will have very serious troubles with castling. So white simply wants to improve. After that, rook a1. If black tries to defend with knight g4, white is going to spoil the castling anyway, with close to strategically winning position. Probably just strategically winning position next to this pawn. So moving forward fast, f4, e4, f5, etc. The king in the middle would get checkmated. Finally, what happened in the game was that black played bishop f6, stable, but then e4 is coming, a fork. c5, it's not yet winning a piece for white, but he's opening files for his pieces, and he's of course making use of those files. Queen to e2, now this knight is hanging, black has to defend it with the queen, because that little move queen e2 was also an additional threat, knight d6. And rook e1, intending obviously bishop takes d5 and queen takes e7 check. Long castle is not really an option for black because the pawn on a7 is hanging, and then there will be deadly checkmate coming after that. So he once again came back with the bishop on f6, defending, overprotecting king 7, and maybe he was hoping somehow that he will get the needed time to castle long. Maybe he will play a6 and then castle. On the top of that, Zaragatsky was low on time, and he had to find something urgent. He found the next star move, which is practically finishing the game. It's a very nice one, b4. That opens the road for his rook and increases the threats against the knight on d5. Actually, the threat is not only to take the pawn on c5. The main threat right now for white is to go b5, which will kick away the queen from the knight on d5, and black will generally lose everything in that situation. So what black did, he took on f5. Obviously, if he had taken on b4, he was losing the knight. And also quite obviously, if he had tried something like b6, there would be b5, and if queen b7 to try to defend the knight, the same old fork that we have seen so many times is still working. Finally, he took on f5, b5, played anyway, queen e6, and queen f1. Foreseen in advance, give me the queen, give me the knight. Black had to put something on the e file, but then another pin is happening, and another knight is lost. All these pins in the center against the opponent's queen, either on c6 or now on the e file, they were very painful, and they made very nice aesthetic, well, I would say just aesthetic feeling while looking at this game. And after knight g4, black simply couldn't stand his position, and Grandmaster Sotaev resigned. The game could have continued knight g4, rook e6, black is winning. The queen, okay, some prophylaxis, not the only way for white to play, but he has to pay respect to this threat. Check followed by knight f2 and then perpetual check. So let's say king h1, black can take the bishop on h6, but then bishop d5, pawn takes, knight b6, and white starts taking pawns. He has extra material. The queen is exceptionally strong. It will soon go here or there on e6 or on h5. That pawn will be hanging. That one will be mostly also falling. Knight is horribly placed on h6. So overall, extra material plus better position, white is winning. But what I liked about this game were the really nice punches. Bishop h6 in particular, and also b4, making use of the pins. And overall, whenever the king stays into the middle, it makes sense for you to try and open as many files as you can, and diagonals for your pieces too. So thank you for watching this, and I will see you next time.